What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's episode, I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how to remove a rack and pinion steering system from a 90 to 93 Honda Accord CB7 CB9, and also how to reinstall a rebuilt rack and pinion steering system. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, as I showed you on the previous video, this is our main leak where this rack and pinion is leaking from. So these are new boots that were replaced, but there is seals inside this shaft right here, which basically seals up the main rack that slides left and right. So as you can see, that thing is dripping like a sin right there, and that's the reason why we're replacing this rack and pinion. All right, so first thing we need to do is remove this cover, and it's held on by 3 10mm, one right here, and one right there. And then once we have this cover off, all the lines will be exposed, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, now we have access to the power steering lines. So you've got a 14mm right here, 2 12s, and a 17mm right here. Now you might be able to get away with using a regular wrench, but that just increases your chance of rounding these bolts off. So what's recommended is these flare line wrenches. They've got basically a little slit cut in the wrench right here, so you can slide over the tube, and then it basically grabs the nut from 6 points, which then reduces the chances of you rounding that bolt off. So essentially you just slide the wrench over the line like that, lock the wrench onto the bolt, and then turn left to loosen up, and that right there gives maximum surface area on that nut so you don't round it off. So we'll go ahead and remove the 14, the 2 12s, and the 17. And we'll put a drain pan underneath here so all the fluid can drain out, and we'll go ahead and do another step while it's draining out. All right, so first things first, on this rack and pinion replacement, I need to go ahead and address this high pressure line. So I'm gonna go underneath the car, take off that 14mm flare nut, and then over here on the pump, there's 2 10mm we need to remove, and then we should be able to pull it out from the engine bay. So let's go ahead and disconnect those bolts and nuts and get this thing pulled out of the engine bay. Okay, so let's work here on the wheel wells. Obviously I've got the car up on jack stands and the wheels are pulled off. So I need to go ahead and remove these cotter pins, remove the castle nut, and I'm gonna loosen this bolt right here. Don't back it out too much, just enough where you can take this tie rod end off. So let's loosen this up, take the cotter pin off, take the castle nut off, and we might have to use the special tool to pop this thing out. So let's go ahead and take care of this. Okay, now that the castle nut, the cotter pin, and this nut is now free, we're left with a tie rod end. So let's go ahead and take this off. But before you start spinning this thing off, you want to go ahead and count how many turns it's going to take to come off, and then write that down. Because when you reinstall this, you want to have it close to kind of alignment spec. So that's the reason for counting how many turns it takes to take off. Okay, so 20 turns is what it took for the passenger side. Let's go ahead and replicate that on the driver's side. Okay, driver's side was 19. Not too shabby, only off by 1 turn. So 19 driver's side, 20 passenger side. Go ahead and write that number down somewhere so you don't forget. Okay, I know that chime-in sounds a little annoying, but I'm not going to talk as much here. But this cover for the steering column, you need to pull these clips right off here, and this plastic cover should come right off, and that'll then expose the joint that's holding the rack and pinion onto the steering column. So let me go ahead and get this thing removed and show you what the next step is. Okay, got the plastic steering column cover off. Now keep in mind, there's 3, I guess, plastic screws that hold this in place on the firewall. So one location here, and one underneath the carpet right there. And once these spring clamps are removed, basically they're just on there with tension, just pull them straight down. And the steering columns, just pull it straight down and it'll come right out. Okay, so here's our main joint for our steering column that attaches to the rack and pinion. So as you can see, there's a 10mm bolt right here, and then there's the back side of the bolt right there. So you might have to go in the steering column, turn the wheel a little bit to the left-hand side just so we can expose the bolt head on the other side. I think that's a 10mm. I can't tell you for sure, but if this is a 10, I'm gonna guess that's a 10, but I'll let you know once I remove this. So you wanna go ahead, fully remove this bolt right here, and then fully remove this bolt, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, now here are the 2 bolts that hold that coupler in position. Now keep in mind, the bottom bolt that secures it onto the rack and pinion has this washer, whereas the top bolt did not have a washer. Okay guys, so here's what we're looking at. The bolts are now disconnected, so this thing should just wiggle right off. And I've got some movement, it's actually able to go upwards. Oh, there it is, I got it. I'm just gonna go ahead and take this joint right off. Just keep in mind, guys, that this taller portion right here goes on the steering column, and the bottom portion right here is very short. That goes on the rack and pinion. So just keep note of that. Okay, we're making some great progress here. The car is officially disconnected from the rack and pinion in means of the steering column itself and also the wheels. So we're gonna go on the bottom of the car and undo the support brackets, and we should be able to wiggle it free. So let's go into the car and show you what's going on next. All right, perfect timing, guys. FedEx just came and dropped a big package off. And there we have it, new rack and pinion with tie rod ends. But let's go ahead and get the old one out first. All right, guys, back underneath this car. Looks like almost all the fluid is just about done here. But anyways, we have a support bracket right here. So you've got a bolt right in this position and a bolt right in this position right here. And secondly, we have another support bracket on the passenger side. So this bolt right here and this bolt right here. So once we undo those 4 bolts, this whole rack and pinion should slide left and right, and we should be able to finagle this out. I'm just hoping and crossing my fingers I don't have to drop down this exhaust in order to get this rack and pinion out. The repair manual says you have to, but this is custom right now, and it's a little bit lower than what the factory was. So I'm just hoping I don't have to mess with the exhaust system right here, and that I can finagle this rack and pinion out of position of where the exhaust stands. All right, so I'm gonna cross my fingers, go ahead, undo those 4 bolts, hold it in position with the brackets, and this rack and pinion should slide left and right, and hopefully this thing should drop down easy. So fingers crossed, let's see what happens. Okay, finally got the old power steering rack out. Man, that was such a hassle. Unfortunately, I did have to lower exhaust and disconnect the lower portion of the front exhaust header. There was just no way around it. Essentially where that steering shaft goes into the car, it's very long. So that exhaust was in the way, and I needed to push that steering rack way downwards and then over to the passenger side. I was able to get this thing out, but all the lines are loose. There's a bracket right here, that's a 10mm. Go ahead and loosen this up because this thing was secure. So now we've got some play. But man, I was fighting with this thing for about an hour and a half. I mean, this was just a hassle getting this thing out. The main culprit being the exhaust header right here. As you can see, it is disconnected from the header itself, and I sure hope I can get this thing back in position due to the fact that the exhaust shop welded this part right here, which then goes on to the flex pipe. So I don't have any other option besides putting those 4 pipes in at one time. So I pray I can get this thing back in easy. So now rack and pinion is officially out of Project CB9. And here's the rack and pinion we removed from Project CB9. This thing was badly leaking at this boot right here. So I mean, basically this thing was just pouring oil out of this thing and leaking on my driveway and whatnot. I had to put an oil pan underneath it for the time being. But these boots were replaced in the past, but there's a seal that's inside here, and there's a shaft that slides left and right, and that seal basically just gave out, and that's basically just what caused this rack and pinion to get a replacement here. So I'm gonna go ahead and send this unit back to Detroit Axle so they can rebuild it, and another customer can use it for their 99.3 Honda Accord. And on top of that, my garage will be more clutter-free with less junk. And as you can see, the sun's going down. I got no more daylight left, so now's an ample opportunity to go ahead and put away all the tools and get ready for the next day. Okay, here is the rebuilt rack and pinion steering from Detroit Axle. This has got a rebuilt gearbox along with all new boots and all new seals on the ends of where the rack slides left and right. And as you can see, they basically painted this thing silver just to make it a little bit more pretty. But I don't really care about that. I care about functionality. Now, I've had great success with Detroit Axle in the past. I've got their front rotors on my Acura RSX, so they're a great company to deal with. Now, I did have to wait about 2 weeks for this thing to arrive. They were basically doing pressure testing and load testing on this. So I'm glad that actually went through some testing before it was delivered to me. And the kit that I bought actually included new tie rod ends. So you've got obviously the tie rod ends for left and right side and the hardware set right there. And here's the tie rods that came with my car. As you can see, rubber seal is split right in half, so these things are toast. So for an extra, I think it was like $20 for these tie rod ends. So it's a pretty good deal. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get this new rack and pinion installed on Project CB9. Okay, it's the next day here, and now that I got plenty of sunshine, I can show you what's going on underneath the car. And as you can see, the rack is totally gone from bolting up on the subframe. And I basically just put the bolts in a position right here so I wouldn't lose track of them. And then here's the lines right here. Now the first step in getting the rack back into the car is I'm going to have to angle it, I believe, that way. But first I need to get the main shaft of the steering into here, which is basically one big rubber bushing, and that basically will go inside the car right there. All right, so once the shaft is in position in this big rubber grommet right here, I can push up on the rack and I can line where the mounting bolts are at, and then we'll take these 2 bolts right here, tighten them up, and then the bracket on this side right there, and we'll torque that to spec, and I'll show you guys the next step. Okay, after about 25 minutes of swearing at this thing and trying to wrestle this thing in position, it's finally bolted up to the subframe. Now what I had to do is basically push the driver's side all the way inwards and then bend this rod arm upwards, because you've got this opening right here, and that rod basically just barely went above this thing. And at the same time, you need to get the steering shaft into the cabinet itself. So fighting those two things at the same time was pretty tricky, but I finally got it. And of course these lines right here were in my way a little bit, so I basically pushed them out of the way. Went ahead and torqued the bolts to spec. So these two bolts on the driver's side are 32 foot-pounds. And with the passenger side, make sure you put the rubber collar on the steering shaft before you go ahead and put this bracket on. And these two bolts are 28 foot-pounds. And so next step, we're gonna go ahead and connect these lines into the steering box. So the manufacturer has put these little plugs right here. So we're just gotta take these plugs out and put their lines back in. Now there is torque specifications for these lines. So the 17 millimeter right here, that's 20 foot-pounds. These two 12 millimeters right here are 9 foot-pounds. And regarding the 14 millimeter that goes to the power steering pump, that's at 28 foot-pounds. We don't have that line in just yet, but let's go and address these three for the time being. Okay, the rack and pinion is officially bolted in with the lines going in here. Now let me give you guys a word of advice here. I was fighting with this line because I think it started to cross thread. So when you put this line in and you got this bolt with the threads on there, you want to make sure that thing is dead straight because, you know, I mean, this thing was going in slightly crooked and I was trying to correct this thing and putting some grease on the threads and whatnot. But you do not want to cross thread this, so just be careful. Hand thread this, just make sure it goes in smooth, then you can take your wrench to it. Now how I resolved this situation is I didn't do too much damage, but when I felt the threads first grab, I basically just kind of pulled on this line a little bit, felt it click, grabbed my special wrench and started tightening things up. And about halfway through, it started to get a lot easier, so I basically just kind of got lucky on this situation. Just never strip threads on this. So just a piece of advice, just be careful putting these lines back into the steering box. All right, guys, that's all the time we got for today's episode. Now I've got a little bit more work to do on the rack and pinion replacement, including taking a trip to the yard and getting some spare parts. And I hope you guys can follow along for that. And I hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas with all your friends and family. Now, if you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button for channel updates. Have a great day.